Welcome to episode 139 of the Human Survival Guide for Dark Site Sessions. I think I got that right. Maybe not. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who look at the nighttime sky, and this podcast is for anyone else who likes going out under the stars. How are you, Shane?
Not bad. Not too bad. I think you broke up a little bit during that intro. So I'm not sure if that'll come through on the recording, but in case it doesn't, do you
want me to redo it?
I'll just spit it out here. Just this episode is okay. Simon's Survival Guide for Dark Site Sessions. So we got an email from one of our listeners, and it's a pretty good email about dark sky observing with larger telescopes than what you and I have been talking about recently, and just kind of what are the essentials? How do we plan? How do we pack? All that kind of stuff. So I think this is a pretty cool topic.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good and pretty fitting for me because, like I was saying, this is the second podcast we're recording. I'm actually at my dark site, my reasonably dark site, I should say. And I'd come out here to do some writing, and it actually ended up clearing off, and I'd forgotten my red light.
Yeah, and really, like that's enough to pretty much end a session, like especially at a dark sky, because and you can still pan the sky and look at objects that you remember the location of, but if you're trying to find something new, it's pretty tough. You can't read your map without destroying your night vision then, and that really ruins the whole experience.
And this is ground I'm not familiar with the area yet, and it's very uneven. It's like all these little hills everywhere. And basically I'm at the end of a farmer's field, really is where I'm at. It's arid land that can't be used for agricultural purposes. So that's really where I'm at. And because of that, it's rough. There's holes in cactus all over. I think there's like 1,000 cactus on this property. So I gotta watch out. No, it's not sandal country.
No, you don't want sandals, especially at night.
Yeah, good stuff. So if I'm breaking up, that's what's going on here. So Shane, how should we do this? We have Simon's email here. Do we just kind of want to start reading through, and then it's fairly lengthy, which is great. And then maybe after sort of each section, or do you want to read the whole thing and then we'll just discuss it, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, why don't we go kind of by section, and we'll provide our thoughts and then just kind of slowly make our way through this whole thing. Do you want me to kick it off?
Yeah, please kick it off, because my connection is a little bit slow.
Yeah, sure. So hello again. This is Simon from the UK. Thanks for keeping the podcast going and helping us observers stay motivated and interested. I've been listening to the recent podcasts, and now that the longest day in the Northern Hemisphere has passed, the nights will be getting darker again. Yeah, exactly. Due to the increase in light pollution near me, I was thinking of spending some time away from the city lights to somewhere darker, but not too far away. A smaller telescope clearly helps, like the recent podcast, or some binos and a comfy chair. But I wondered if you might do some thoughts on how to get the most out of an observing session at a nearby dark site with something maybe a bit bigger, like a 100 millimeter refractor, or a medium Schmidt Cassegrain, like a C8, a Celestron 8-inch.
Yeah.
So anyways, he goes on to say, I'm thinking along these lines, 3 trips to the car maximum, although just one would be better. So he's got the trips kind of broken down. So trip number 1 is a mount and tripod with wiring and everything kind of included with that. The second trip would be your optical tube, so your telescope with finder and the eyepieces as well in a box. And then the third trip is a box with everything else, which is sturdy enough to act as a seat. And then he goes on to say, if power is required, use a lightweight, high capacity lithium pack for the go-to and the dew heaters. And already have that attached to the tripod, so it's really not an additional add. So what do you think about that, Chris? How do you pack for our little just sessions that are maybe within say an hour, where we might go out in the early evening and return home the same night?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think this is pretty close to what I do anyway. I've got my tripod and mount, scaled back so that they're about as light can be, and so that really can go out in one or maybe two trips at most. I try to be careful because one thing I notice when I'm trying when you can limit the trips so much. And then, sometimes I'd be like trying to drag too much in one trip and you end up like banging things against doors and stuff like that. So really it's just, the weight of the gear, I think sometimes as much as it is the trips out the door. So yeah, but having a tripod and mount and then having, an eyepiece case and then the telescope, and then usually I throw my my atlas under my arm. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. I can do it. I do it in probably 4 or 5 trips maybe, but it's it's pretty lightweight and easygoing.
Yeah, yeah. I've kind of designed my eyepiece case, like what I put in it anyway, to help reduce the trips that I'm making to the vehicle. So inside my eyepiece case is the obvious. I've got my eyepieces. I've got my filters. I've got little cleaning things in case an eyepiece has some dust on it. My red flashlight is in there. My pen, my notepad for recording my observations. Kind of all of the miscellaneous stuff like that is all in the eyepiece case. It has a shoulder strap, so I can put that over my shoulder. And then typically the tripod and the telescope are in my hands. Like telescope is in its bag, it's in one hand, tripod is in the other, out to the car, load that up, back indoors, grab the chair, and I have it's a container for my atlas and my observing lists and all of that stuff. So that comes, and then bottle of water and a granola bar, and away I go. So the short trips outside of town is pretty easy for me. I used to overdo it a little bit, like I might bring a telescope and binoculars, or maybe I'd bring a big telescope and a little telescope. But the reality is with those sessions, they're just not long enough to really warrant bringing a whole lot of gear, and really I probably don't even need to bring my eyepiece case for the most part, because for those sessions I'm likely just using a couple of eyepieces, a wide field one, and then I'll maybe put in my zoom eyepiece for a wider variation in my focal lengths. But really, it's just not a super intensive session when I do those ones. Now, it might be a little different, I guess, if I plan to stay out the whole night. But usually on those sessions, I'm only going out until I'm starting to get to that point where it's like, I still have to drive and I'm getting pretty tired, and I don't want to, make this a dangerous return. So, it's a bit of a balance with making sure you have enough energy to drive home, which is why those sessions, for me anyway, are not super long.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit lucky because like near my house, I can drive less than 20 minutes and be under a magnitude 6 sky. That was a little bit by design. Like when we bought the house, we kind of bought it halfway between where we'd be working and like dark skies. So I'm about 15 or so minutes to work, and I'm about 15 minutes to where the sky starts getting pretty decent. And so I'll even get up at night and drive out and kind of observe under Mag 6 skies. So I kind of hear this where, sometimes I'll just like pack the car and leave it in the garage. And then, I go out, hop in, and then drive out at like 1 o'clock in the morning, sometimes do a couple hours and then drive home. So it's nice to only have to go that far. But if you're going much more than 20 minutes or so, it gets to be a bit of a drag and definitely fatigue. Definitely, my opinion, anyway, once you get much beyond 20 minutes, that can definitely become a bit of a hazard here. So, but I do like to do longer sessions for sure. Like if I'm going out, typically it's going to be at least 2 or 3 hours. So, I might be bringing a little bit more in the way of gear, and I'll always bring a pair of binoculars with me, and now my observing chair and that sort of thing, just to kind of have that. And often I'm taking a table too, but and it all depends on where somebody lives and safety and security things and how comfortable you are doing this. But sometimes I leave some pretty basic stuff, like in my car. Like sometimes I leave my like a chair in the car. My cars all have red flashlights. Don't have my car this weekend, so that's why I forgot my red flashlight. Just some stuff like that. I always keep like a few things packed in there, like some Advil. Actually, this is one thing I keep meaning to mention, or Tylenol, or whatever your headache reduction medication of choice is. This is a game changer one night for you anyway, and that is that eventually you'll have a night where you go observing and you get out there and you set up and you get a headache that's so bad you just tear down and drive home. And that happened to me once, and it was like literally just bad enough. And we all have headaches from time to time, and it was just bad enough that you don't want to observe. And so I think that in everybody's kit they should put whatever relieves their headache. And I remember talking about this with somebody, and it turned out I was like the only one that in my group that didn't have that. And I've certainly, I think on one night I borrowed some Advil or Tylenol from somebody, and then now I always make sure I have a few packed away with me when I'm going on those trips, because sometimes like you can get a headache, and something silly or stupid like that can end a session pretty quick. So I think it's good to try to limit the trips, and I was actually thinking when I first read this bit by Simon, I was thinking about our trips down into the grasslands, actually a little bit more so than maybe what he was talking about. I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah. I think we can split this up into sort of two parts. Like one is just the evening trip, and then one is maybe a weekend trip or something like that. And I think a previous podcast, we talked a little bit about the weekend trip, but you and I are planning one here real soon, so it's probably a good time to revisit it. But maybe before we get into that, just what you mentioned here about, the Advil or the Tylenol, it's a good segue into the next paragraph in Simon's email. And one of his 3 trips was a box with everything else. And then he goes on to say, the box has the atlas, the observing plan, snacks, water, coffee, cell phone, a compass. A compass is important if you are doing like a go-to mount, or you need to know north. I guess a compass can help you out a little bit with that. But what's interesting here, some other things that is probably important that I actually include in some of my packing. So one, he says here, is a small toolkit. And I think it's important to know sort of some of the components on your telescope. Like if you need Allen wrenches to tighten something up, if you need special tools for collimation, because when you're bouncing your gear down some back roads, or maybe it's smooth pavement all the way to your site, maybe it isn't. Some things can rattle loose, and it's happened to me where I've shown up on my observing location. Well, I think I told the story about our Saskatchewan Summer Star Party when I showed up and my light bridge had basically rattled apart and it wasn't usable. So it's probably good to take a pair of pliers, a screwdriver, or and some Allen wrenches, because those are sort of the common things that probably apply to all telescopes. But some things we didn't talk about either, which, I do sometimes factor in, but like gloves and a hat, because it can get cold out there. And even if it's warm during the day, if you're sitting in a chair and it gets down to single digits in the evening, like Celsius, that still gives, is pretty chilly, and you're going to want to dress warm. What else does he have here? Charcoal foot warmers. I usually do have a couple of those types of like glove or hand warmers in my kit, just in case I want a little extra, comfort. And then, for you and I and many others, there's, sometimes a mosquito consideration. Now, whether you want to bring spray, which we're not huge fans of, but maybe, some, long sleeve shirts or things like that, just to keep the mosquitoes off of you is sometimes important too.
Yeah, some of the stuff, and I think 3 trips might be a bit tough, but because at least here anyway, we kind of have to plan a little bit, kind of have to reach a little bit. And you'll recall, we even talked about it back in May or sometime a few months ago, maybe it was April. and I was out scouting some sites, and then I went out to observe at a site, and it had been pretty warm. Like it was like 25 or so degrees here in the city. And then I went out to this site, and it was like 0 or -3. It was this huge temperature difference. It was supposed to go to 12 degrees that evening, but it had gone about 12 or 15 degrees cooler than forecast. I know that doesn't happen in most places, having observed in a lot of different places, but we're faced with that here. I wasn't really quite dressed for it, so I just again got out and did some binocular observing, and then just didn't stay too long because it was also a little bit of a shock to the system. Yeah, and having lots of water, I think there's a few things that I've really learned about going and observing. I've learned some things from you. I've learned some things from my past observing friends, but you're the water guy. You always have extra water. I think I've borrowed and stolen more water from you than a camel, just about. I mean, man, you're always good to have an extra few bottles of water around, and that's one thing I always learned. Like I never used to to consider water like an essential item to take observing, but it certainly is. Along with some of this other stuff, and I also think that's sort of the one thing from you. My friend Graham taught me about always bringing a pair of lined pants, whether they're like a lined jean or a lined, not just windbreaker, but a lined windbreaker with like a fleece lining and that sort of thing, because those can really extend a session. I'd actually forgotten. I was going observing with Mike, and it was going to be a really warm evening, and I'd forgotten a coat. And I had, I think I even had like gloves and a hat and a sweater. But I had thrown my lined pants in the car. And so I was able to get most of a session in, and then finally mentioned it to Mike, and he actually had brought an extra coat. So it's one of those things where when we all throw like an extra whatever in the vehicle with us, sometimes it's not you that ends up using it. It's your observing friend or somebody else. We've certainly had lots of newcomers come and observe with us, and that's always great. And often they're the recipients of whatever extra gear we have, right?
Yeah, for sure. So what about the dark sky trips where we're gone for multiple days, Chris? Does that change your packing? And if so, what is different?
Yeah, it really, like, you really have to focus. So where we go, there's nothing. So whatever you take with you is pretty much what you're going to survive on for however long you're going for. And I mean, we typically do 2 to 3 day trips. So you've got to bring all of your water for that period of time. I think the recommendation is like 3 or 4 liters a day. It's hard to imagine, but I can easily double that. I can easily drink 8 liters of water a day when we're out doing that kind of activity. So usually I'm trying to bring somewhere close to 12 to 18 liters of water with me. It seems like you can never have enough. Like, it's weird because you sit around home, and even at home, I'll drink some water, but I probably wouldn't drink more than a couple liters of water a day, maybe 3 at most. But when we're dark sky observing, it can be 8 or 9 liters of water a day even. So let's see what else. And the camping gear, that was the other thing. You and we haven't talked about that much, but I think there was a period of time, Shane, where we talked more about our camping gear and how to optimize that than about telescope gear, probably for a few years there.
Oh, for sure. Like the camping gear for me anyway was going to almost end some of those trips because it was not sleeping well in the tent. And when you're staying up late and waking up early because of the sun, you have to maximize your rest time that you have in the night. And I just wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating well, and it made the trips not very good. So yeah, we spent a lot of time and like time in terms of years, just sort of refining some of that too, to make sure that these trips were as enjoyable as possible. And it really made a big difference. And I think the focus for me anyway was a good tent, a good sleeping mattress or pad, and the right sleeping bag. And I didn't get those right the first time. It took me a couple cracks to do that properly I was comfortable.
Yeah, and that's been huge for me as well, just optimizing that sleep system,
Mhm.
really, because I used to spend, I don't know, it must have been 4 or 5 hours packing anyway, and so I didn't really have like a system, right? And you really need to think about it like a sleep system.
Mhm.
And through our conversations, I began to think that way. And by not having a sleep system, well, first of all, nothing is working in conjunction with each other, and so it's not going to work as well. And then the second thing is you're always just grabbing stuff, and you're taking too much stuff with you, and so your pack time and your breakdown time are much longer than they should be. And then just the usability of it. So one thing I used to use is like an inflatable air mattress. And now you really disliked, I would say even hated air
Yep.
mattresses, but
Yep.
like personally, I actually like them. I find them pretty comfortable. It doesn't bother me at all. But when you switched over to some of the mats that you were using, well, even though I was fine and comfortable on mine, one thing that was happening is they seem to be a magnet for any moisture that's in the tent. And so they would be covered in moisture. So I'd be like trying to dry those out. So you'd be halfway home before I was even dry enough to start packing up. And the same with the tent. I was just using like a standard, what I consider to be standard camping tents, and they would get too moisture ridden, either with dew or just my own condensation from sleeping at night. And then I was purchasing tents that were made for, they were like more general tents made for anybody to go and buy and use in a variety of different environments. But our environment here is very specific. It's a very cold environment at night, and it's a very hot and dry environment during the day. At night you can have some moisture, but typically you want to have a semi-permeable tent that is able to vent that moisture through it. If we get rain, the rain comes in these horrendous thunderstorms anyway, so I mean, chances are most tents are going to leak in that situation. But I do have a tent now that's more like a bomb shelter than a tent. And the other thing is that my tent is very small, and we've kind of, typically you see people get larger and larger tents maybe, and we've kind of scaled it down to tents that are like 1 or 1.5 person tents, because they're small, lightweight, portable, and they withstand the high winds and the horrendous storms that we can get here. But they're easy to pack, and then they dry super fast. They're made to withstand a good beating in bad weather, and then you can dry them out, and you're good to go.
Yeah, makes a big difference, and wholeheartedly agree. That whole camping system is important. On the astronomical side for these trips, it doesn't really change a lot for me. I'm maybe taking a larger telescope, for sure I am, for the most part. The big difference for me though is that I will sometimes take additional telescopes, because we're there all day. I'll take some solar observing stuff, whether it's a white light filter or the hydrogen alpha telescope. It just gives you something else to do while you're sitting around. And now that we have these little Borg telescopes, Chris, I'm going to double mount them. Like I have a dual mount, like where I can put two telescopes on my Alt-Az mount. So the big one will go on there, and then on the other side, my plan is to have the little Borg for some super wide field stuff, and sort of act as a little bit of a finder on there. But I think it'll be kind of neat to actually have those two telescopes operating at the same time. 120 millimeter and then a 50 millimeter refractor will be pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And before I forgot to say this, as part of my sleep system. So Shane, do you want to talk about them? Like, and this might seem a little bit ridiculous to spend so much time talking about the camping gear, but I actually think it is really important. But you turned me on to these. What do they call it? Is it a mega mat? Is that what we're using for these sleep? Because you bought one, and then I set up on a cactus with my air mattress, and then I had to buy one too.
Yeah, so the company is called Exped, EXPED, and the mat that we have, I think, is the Mega Mat Duo or something like that. And it's what's unique about it. So as you mentioned, Chris, I don't like air mattresses, and the reason for that is at least the cheaper ones. I'm sure maybe like the better ones would be more comfortable, but I'm a side sleeper, and the way they have these, like a lot of the, I don't know, kind of the typical air mattresses that you buy in the big box stores, they have these riflets that are like the length of the air mattress. And if you're a side sleeper, at least for me, it put a lot of pressure on the points of my body where they were making kind of the contacts, so like my shoulders, my hips. I would be able to sleep for no more than an hour, and the shoulders and hips would be in a lot of pain. I'd have to rotate over, and then I would get at most an hour on that side of my body, and then I'd have to flip over. It was almost like you're cooking meat over a grill or something like that. But so this would happen all night, and resulted in a poor sleep. So the research that I did talked about these XPAD mats as being the solution. And they have some similarities to air mattresses. Like, they do have air in them. Like, they take air in, they're self-inflating. But what's unique about them is they have foam in them as well. So they have a little more firmness or density to them. And for side sleepers, there's just not as much pressure added, to your shoulders and hips. And I have to say, I was somewhat skeptical, maybe fairly skeptical that this would solve my problems. But lo and behold, it did. It really made the world of difference for me in terms of comfort. And then the other thing that these provide is, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the R value, so like the insulating factor, how well does it keep the cold away from you? Because you're still on cold ground, and at night that cold will come through an air mattress, and we'll make it a little chillier. These XPADs, I think, have the highest R value, or if it's not the highest, it's like, right up there. And it makes it a lot warmer or more comfortable again, so that your temperature on top of that thing is consistent. Whereas sometimes, like on an air mattress, the part touching the mattress is cold, but then the part of your body that's away from the air mattress might be too warm, and it was a hard balance. So anyway, that mattress was a game changer. You pay for it. It's not insignificant, especially when you compare the cost of just an air mattress at a big box store. But I have zero regrets. And if that air mattress ever got wrecked or lost or whatever, I'd replace it without thinking twice.
Yeah, and you bought it and you said, oh, you really should get one of these, and I was like reasonably comfortable, but so my comfort level was fine, but my issue was that I get cold when I sleep, and we're going to bed, and sometimes we've gone observing to -4, -5, and crawled in my tent when I'm looking at the temperature, several digits below 0 Celsius. And I just found the air mattress to be absolutely brutal in those conditions, because it just is like taking any extra heat out of you and putting it out into the outside air. And then when that air mattress went, I really hemmed and hawed and thought, well, Shane says this one's really good, and he's pretty picky about his sleeping. So I bought one, and I could not believe how comfortable it was. Like, some people in the reviews say it's more comfortable than their bed at home. And I would say it's one of the most comfortable things I've ever slept on. Air mattress, regular bed, you throw everything in there. It's one of the most comfortable things. Like, you do pay for it. But, one of the things to think about in relation, and that you and I talked about between us, but not on the podcast, is that we're not going and staying in a hotel, right? Like, this is where you're spending the money. Sometimes we're going and just camping on land somewhere, so we're not even paying for a campsite or something like that. We're just throwing up a tent for 10 or 12 hours or something like that. And then this is a good place to put some money. And that was a few years ago now, and mine's still just like new.
Yeah, it's held up really well. And like I mentioned too, like for me, it seriously was coming down to the point where I was no longer going to make those trips, because I was just a mess, by the end of them. And even like the first night of astronomy was okay, but I would start to think about, I'm going to have a bad sleep. So I was ending the sessions early. And then the second night I was just, super tired, because the previous night I didn't get a good sleep. And I know we probably harp, or it seems like maybe we harp on this too much about, the value of a good sleep on these trips, but it's really important for me. And that's why I think we talk about it a lot, because it's important for you too. And it really makes a difference.
And the other thing I got to mention, so it was not only mattress, but I bought what's called a camping quilt. I moved away from a sleeping bag. I really
Mhm.
don't like sleeping bags at all. I never did. I just, I thought this was part and parcel of camping. And I found that a lot of people had moved to these camping quilts, especially people like myself who tend to get cold at night and also don't like sleeping bags. So the problem with a sleeping bag for me is that I find it kind of constrictive, and I think I really move around a lot when I sleep or something, and I don't like it. Like I would just wake up kind of pushed all against my sleeping bag in weird directions, or I would actually in my sleep like unzip the sleeping bag and pretty much get out of it, which would end up getting pretty cold. So I bought one of these camping quilts. Mine's by a company named Bandit Quilts, and it actually wasn't any more expensive than a high quality sleeping bag. But they custom make it. You send them like your sizing, and they custom make it for you. And it has some sort of proprietary material in it, and it looks like it's nylon, but it feels like fleece. It's really strange because you look at it and you think it's going to feel like nylon, but it doesn't. It actually feels like this super soft material. It's really strange. You look at it and then you feel it. It doesn't feel at all like what it looks like. And so I have one that's good down to, I think it's like -12 or -14 Celsius. I didn't want to go any colder because I thought it might be too warm in the summer. But I have found between the mat and the bag, yeah, that's been a good combination. Anyway, should chat a little bit more about astronomy stuff, I guess. But I think the camping is very important.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. And like I said too, like really for my astronomy stuff, it doesn't change that much from a normal trip. Just out like an hour outside of town. My dark sky, my dark sky gear is basically the same, except maybe I'll bring an extra telescope or two, just because you're there that much longer and you're going to use it probably.
Yeah, the thing that I'll bring more of, I often use filters. I don't use filters as much, like just around house, or even if I go out for an hour, I might use a filter. But when we go to dark sky sites, like I bring all my filters, and because we have longer sessions, it's a little bit easier. I end up using them more.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like when you're on those trips, you don't want to be without, or you don't want to regret leaving something at home, because you make such an effort to get out to those dark skies, and the dark skies are so amazing to observe under. You want it to be the best session possible. So in that regard, you bring the gear.
Yeah. One thing I will say, sort of combining both the camping and the astronomy, one thing that you can find is at campsites sometimes your camping location isn't as cracked up as you want it to be for doing astronomy. So one thing to do is try to plan ahead a little bit. Sometimes you can even go on Google Maps or whatever, and then actually go through the campsites to see which one would work best. Or sometimes you can call like whether it's a national park or provincial park or something, and either see if there's sites that would work best for this, because sometimes they actually have dark sky campgrounds. Like I know at the Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park here in Saskatchewan, they have a dark sky campground. I don't want to say anything else, but I know some other places are working on dark site campgrounds. I think that's really cool. I know that that's an idea that's taking off, like we were talking before about astronomy becoming more of an interest after during the pandemic, and hopefully retaining after the pandemic. So I've heard from some parks that are actually considering creating that option for people. And then as well, sometimes you can contact the park or wherever it is you're going to find out about local sites. And then additionally, sometimes like I know like I do some other volunteer work for another agency, and sometimes you can just get permission to actually use some of their land for like one night sessions, like go out and camp and do some observing. And like as you know, Shane, like we've got some permission to do that, which is super cool. So sometimes it's also something to think about. Like you can kind of think outside the box a little bit for maybe what you can do for an observing session. So instead of just doing a run out for an hour or so, there might be an organization that you've had contact with where you can actually figure out a spot. Like they might have a good spot for you to go and camp. And even like I have neighbors now that have land in places that have offered me sites to go and do this on. I think in general people think it's really cool, and land that otherwise doesn't get used sometimes at the edge of farmers' fields or what have you can be really awesome for doing astronomy. And I think sometimes people are just really excited to hear that you can make use of this, and we'll give you permission to go and use those lands.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Okay, sort of our camping episode, almost more than anything.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, do you have any? I'm all camped out here, so I'm ready. I'm ready to shove off and go and live in the fields for a few days. So I don't know if you have anything else to add, Shane, but I think I've said my bit.
Yeah, that's all I have too. So thanks, Chris, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.